Morning had a metallic taste in Kean River's mouth, the kind that came from a half night of sleep and a whole day's worth of hope. His shirt was starched within an inch of its life, collar nibbling his neck, the only dress shirt he owned that could pass for interview ready. On the cracked mirror in the hallway he'd taped a blue sticky note with 2 words, "Be kind," because his mother always said kindness opened doors, and today he wanted more than anything for a door to open. He checked the time on his phone, 8:03 a.m., battery at 14%, and slipped the phone into his pocket like a secret he would try not to use before he needed it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. He paused by the kitchen doorway where Ma stood over a pan, coaxing 2 eggs into being with a patience she never seemed to have for herself. The kitchen window faced the alley, and the alley was a thin corridor of mourning, stray cat on a dumpster, laundry line creaking in a breeze that tasted like bus exhaust. On the table sat a folder he'd arranged and rearranged for a week, resume printed on the library's best paper, school transcripts he was proud of now that the numbers looked like they belonged to someone else, a letter from his physics teacher that made him sound like a future somebody. "You got this," Ma said, without looking up. Her voice carried that quiet hum of faith she wore even when her joints complained and the rent date circled a day too soon on the calendar. "Smile with your eyes. Don't let them think you're scared." "I'm not scared." He didn't elaborate, because fear was complicated. He wasn't afraid of the interview, he was afraid of wanting it too much, of a door opening to a corridor that ended in another closed door. Afraid of how his little sister, Bree, had already started telling her friends that her brother was going to work at a real office, like in the shows, with a badge that let you beep through glass. Afraid of proving his guidance counselor wrong in a way that required more risk than swagger. Bree padded in, hair braided last night in a zigzag that looked like lightning frozen mid-strike. "If they give you a key card," she said, "can I use it to open the fridge?" Kean grinned, scooped her into a half-hug, and let the humor loosen the knot in his chest. He could feel Ma watching him now, her eyes soft and far away, like she could see the day folding open and also see every day that had folded before it. "You packed your bus card?" Ma asked. "Yeah." 2 routes printed like a nerd. From his pocket he pulled the transit map he'd highlighted with neon yellow. It made the day look solvable. 2 buses, a 10-minute walk, a lobby with plants that were probably real. The internship program downtown, the one with the glass elevator and the receptionist whose glasses were an accessory, not a necessity, had sent a reminder yesterday, "Please arrive by 9:30 a.m. for check-in. Professional attire recommended." He glanced at the time again, 8:07 now, and tucked the map into the folder. The sky out front stacked gray upon gray like someone had tiled clouds in cinder block. He kissed Ma's cheek, promised Bree a celebration dance whether or not there was anything to celebrate, and stepped into the hallway where the light bulb had learned to flicker like an old heartbeat. On the stoop, the city introduced itself the way it always did, buses whispering their steel breath, brake rotors squealing like stubborn violin strings, the scent of someone's early onions and someone else's weed spooling out of a cracked window. Kean kept his folder dry under his jacket and started down Maple toward the 14 line. His shiny shoes, borrowed from his cousin who wore a half-size down, pinched both pinky toes in a way that felt like optimism with a mean streak. He rehearsed answers quietly as he walked, the words fogging out in front of him then dissolving as if the morning swallowed them whole. "Tell us about a time you showed initiative." He'd built a hexapod robot out of popsicle sticks and servos scavenged from broken RC cars. "What makes you a good fit for our team?" He knew how to listen like it mattered, how to notice broken things before they became dangerous, how to sit in rooms where he didn't know the rules and learn them without losing himself. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" The honest answer, that he saw himself still here if he didn't hustle, he'd translate into something that sounded like college and contribution. A siren stitched itself across the block and vanished. The crosswalk at Delaney blinked its white man, and Kean stepped off the curb when something in the corner of his eye snagged him, just a glint at first, like a coin dropped from the sky. He turned his head and found the glint attached to a pair of glasses magnifying eyes that looked like small moons. The woman stood alone beside the bus shelter, coat fastened a button too high, slippers braving a puddle. Her purse gaped open the way a mouth does when words are misplaced. Inside, a checkbook, a comb with pearly teeth, a paper with the word medication printed bold. She wasn't looking at any of these. She was studying a parking meter like it might remember her. The 14 bus ghosted past on the far side of the street, and a ripple of cursing rose from the shelter as two men threw their arms up in frustration. Kian had 12 minutes until the next bus. 12 minutes was not an emergency. 12 minutes was enough time to help somebody find a thing and still keep his day intact. He stepped toward the woman, the way you approach a sleeping dog, announcing yourself with your posture and your hope. "Morning, ma'am. You okay?" She startled only a little, and then the fragments of her focus gathered like a school of small fish. "Well," she said, and the words slid out like she'd been holding it with both hands, "I'm trying to get to Henderson Lane." She pointed up the street like directions might be waiting in the trees. Kian's internal compass ticked. Henderson Lane lived in the other direction, a curve of townhouses that grew roses with budgets. "That's not this way," he said gently. "Do you have the number for somebody I can call?" He tried to arrange his face into the expression Ma said people trusted, eyebrows kind, mouth in the shape of listening. Her fingers rummaged in the purse and emerged with a wallet older than his mother's threat to quit night shifts. She unfolded it, revealing a laminated card with her name, a library card, a soft photo of a man with a jaw like a gentle anchor, and a phone number on a tiny white tag. "Agnes Calloway," she said, like she was reciting attendance to make sure she still showed up. "My daughter's number is there. But I didn't want to make a fuss." "It's not a fuss." He reached for his phone, heard its battery whisper the word foolish, and dialed anyway. It rang and rang into a recorded voice that told him the mailbox was full. He glanced at the time, 8:12 now, and felt his plans shuffle sideways in his chest. "There's a bus," Agnes offered, peering down the street with hope that wasn't tethered to anything visible. "I use the bus. My church is past Henderson. St. Bartholomew's. They have bells that are too proud for their tower. Do you know it?" "I hear them some Sundays," he said. He knew the bells the way you know a neighbor's laugh, not what it means, only that it repeats. He pulled out his crumpled map, the highlighter lines turning this part of the city into warm veins. Henderson Lane. If he stayed, he'd miss the next bus, which meant he'd miss the connecting one, which meant he'd arrive sweating apologies that wouldn't make a good first impression. If he left, the woman would still be here. Or, worse, she wouldn't. He thought of the sticky note on the mirror, the one that had been more like a dare than a habit when he wrote it. Be kind. Sometimes kindness was free. Sometimes it had a bill attached you couldn't see yet. "I can take you," he heard himself say. "It's on my way." A little lie placed gently in the world, not to save face, but to keep her from feeling like she was an obstacle he was reluctantly carrying. Agnes blinked at him as if he'd offered to move the moon. "A gentleman," she said. "My Harry was one. He used to hold the door with his back when we brought groceries in, like he thought the door might bite me." She smiled then, a small warmth pressed into the cold morning. They started walking. Kian offered his arm because Ma would have wanted him to, and also because the ground had decided to be tricky beneath Agnes' slippers. The city didn't change for people, people changed their pace for the city. As they reached the corner, a boy on a bike cut too close, his tire flicking dirty water onto Kian's pants like an insult. The boy glanced back, embarrassed, and then sprinted away from the chance to apologize. Kian looked down at the stain soaking into his interview pants. He could hear his guidance counselor's voice, the one that turned compliments into warnings. Professionalism is a language. Learn it. He exhaled the annoyance the way you open your hand to let a moth fly out. "Do you live alone, Miss Calloway?" he asked. "Keep her talking," he told himself. Sometimes words are a handrail. "In theory," she said. "In practice, my daughter lives everywhere. A phone in each room. She says, 'Mother, stay put.' But the day forgets to tell me what I agreed to." She laughed softly, the sound of a piano missing one key but playing anyway. My hydrangeas are at war with the soil. They want to be blue and the ground wants them pink. I sympathize with both. Kian smiled. You sound like my physics teacher. He gives the forces personalities and then tells us to referee. Good teachers do that, she said, eyes clearing for a second as if the word teacher gave her mind a chair to sit on. Do you go to school? For now, he said. Trying to go further. He didn't offer the full story, the savings account with a number that was brave but not enough, the scholarship applications that asked him to sound extraordinary and humble at the same time, the way rent ate the edges of every plan. They reached the bus stop for the 22, which would get them closer to Henderson. The schedule warned of delays like a fortune teller with a sense of humor. Kian weighed options he didn't like. He could try to call the internship office, but asking for understanding before they met him seemed like bad strategy. He could type an email, but his breath was fog in the combined air of panic and obligation. Excuse me, a security guard from the corner mini-mart said, stepping out with a frown that had never learned to mind its own business. Is everything okay here? His gaze skimmed past Agnes and landed on Kian's hand on her arm, an equation he mistook. Kian felt it, the familiar math of suspicion laid over his skin like a transparency. We're fine, Agnes said before Kian could decide how polite to be. She patted his arm. This gentleman is escorting me. The guard's posture recalculated. All right. Just checking. He lingered long enough to make his point, he could make trouble if he chose, and then retreated to his glass box where the TV glowed blue. Kian's jaw unclenched. He didn't want to carry that guard's gaze into the rest of the day, but some looks were Velcro. Agnes' fingers tightened around his elbow. That man has too much time, she whispered conspiratorially. He should plant something. The 22 arrived wheezing like it had climbed the hill barefoot. Kian paid for both of them without announcing it and guided Agnes to a seat by the window. The bus moved with the reluctance of an old idea being replaced by a new one. He texted Ma, running late. Helping someone get home. Might miss check-in. Her answer came back almost on top of his message, as if she'd been watching the words arrive. Proud of you. Doors that don't open weren't your doors. He stared at that line for a second longer than necessary, memorizing it in case he needed it later and the world wouldn't give it again. As blocks unspooled, Agnes narrated what she saw in a gentle, sideways way. That bakery has good light, she said. Even the bread grows up confident. Oh, look at that little dog. His leash is a necklace. Then, after a minute of rain scratching at the windows, my husband used to say we live between two winds. One that told us who we were and one that told us who we could be. That second wind is bossy. Your husband sounds like a poet, Kian said. He was a postman, she replied, offended by neither the suggestion nor the truth. But letters need poets, too. The bus stopped at Landry and 10 new passengers climbed aboard with the energy of people who'd already had to be somewhere. Kian checked his phone. 8:41, he would not make 9:30 even if a helicopter lowered him into the lobby. A tightness crawled up his throat and settled behind his tongue. He had worked so hard to make today look like someone else's today, pressed shirt, printed map, smile rehearsed in the mirror. Now he was just a kid on a bus with a stranger who trusted him for reasons that shouldn't have to be reasoned. He typed a quick email to the internship coordinator, Ms. Serrano, his thumb clumsy with urgency. Good morning, this is Kian Rivers. I'm on my way but delayed. Assisting an elderly neighbor who's disoriented. I understand if this affects my consideration. Wanted to let you know. He hit send and watched the little paper plane icon shoot across the screen like it was going somewhere the rest of him couldn't. Battery at 9%. The bus turned toward neighborhoods where the paint lasted longer and the trees had names. Agnes leaned forward. Oh, she said, bright as sunrise. There. St. Bartholomew's. See how the bell tower stands like it thinks it's taller than God. Kian did see it now, simple stone, the bell that waited to be told what to say. This is us, he told her. They disembarked into a breeze that smelled like yesterday's rain shrugged off the leaves and hit the pavement for effect. "Now," Agnes said, and patted her purse until the checkbook squared itself. "We find Henderson Lane. It hides from me like an old friend playing a joke." Kian oriented the map. Henderson wasn't far, a gentle curve off Willow. As they walked, Agnes' steps shortened, the way a day shortens in November without asking permission. Kian adjusted. He could feel the interview behind him now, not like a door closing, but like a corridor bending. He allowed himself to be disappointed and refused to punish himself for it. If he had to be the same person on both sides of opportunity, he might as well practice now. They reached a block where every porch declared its personality, a swing accessorized with quilts, a bicycle lazily handcuffed to a post, a porch cat who had opinions about humans. Agnes slowed when the houses developed front gardens that used the word curated without irony. "My hydrangeas would gossip with these," she murmured. "Which number is yours?" Kian asked. 9, she said confidently. Then, a beat later, or 19. Or, dear me. She looked at her hands like the number might be written there. A woman in exercise clothes approached with the speed and focus of someone who'd decided to improve herself and was angry about how long it took. Kian stepped a little in front of Agnes without thinking. "Excuse me," he called. "Do you know where the Callaways live?" "Agnes is trying to get home." The woman's face arranged and rearranged itself as she processed the scene, the way faces do when they flip through assumptions like channels. Something softened when she looked at Agnes. "Oh honey," she said. "Agnes is over on Henderson. You're on Willow. 2 blocks down, take the curve. Her house has a blue door and a wreath that disagrees with the season." She smiled like she'd just said something kind to herself. "You okay, Miss Calloway?" "I'm chasing my street like a squirrel chases a bad idea," Agnes replied. That seemed to satisfy the woman, who resumed her jog and disappeared around a narrative made entirely of personal bests. They found the curve of Henderson like a river turning. The houses here had old money manners and new money haircuts. The blue door appeared exactly as promised, a shade between sky and daring. A wreath of dried lemons and eucalyptus argued gently with April. Kian's relief arrived late and dressed as caution. The porch light was on in the day, which meant either forgetfulness or vigilance. He knocked, then pressed the bell when the first attempt felt too shy. Inside, the slow shuffle of steps, and then the door opened to a woman in her 50s whose composure looked like it cost something. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke across the first syllable. She pulled Agnes into a hug that told the story of the last hour with no adjectives. Over her shoulder, her eyes found Kian and softened with gratitude while bracing for blame. "I was at a doctor's appointment." The aide was supposed to. She stopped herself from completing the sentence because finishing it made it heavier. "She found me a gentleman," Agnes announced, as if she had plucked Kian from a hat. This is, she looked at him like the space around his name was a fog. "Kian," he supplied. He tried not to look like he was counting the minutes he'd lost. The woman stuck out her hand with more sincerity than awkwardness. "I'm Lydia Calloway." "Thank you. Thank you." She looked beyond him, at the quiet street, as if it might confess why it hadn't kept Agnes safe. "Please, come in. Let me get you something. Coffee? Water?" I should go," he said, polite but angled toward the sidewalk. "I had an interview, but I'm late." He didn't want payment. He wanted to preserve the version of the morning where he could still show up and say he'd tried. Lydia's face adjusted into business. "Of course. Could I at least call you a ride? My car is out, but..." "I'm good," Kian said. He hesitated, then added, "If it helps, the number on Agnes' card goes to a full voicemail. Might be worth checking." He didn't say it like a reproach, only as logistics. Lydia closed her eyes briefly in the way of someone who knows her systems are only as good as her exhaustion. "Thank you," she said again, uncertain what words could possibly fit between that and everything else. She reached into a drawer on the entry table, pulled out a business card, and scribbled her cell number on the back. "If you ever need a reference or anything, please call. And please text me your full name so I can tell my mother's doctor the story right." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it with effort. Kean took the card mostly to have something to do with his hands. "I'm glad she's safe," he said, and meant it. Agnes turned toward him, eyes bright with recognition. "Kean," she repeated, like she'd found the word at the bottom of a pocket. "You are kindness like a good coat." The compliment landed somewhere he didn't have a shelf for. "Take care, Miss Calloway," he said softly. He stepped onto the porch, the blue door easing shut behind him like a curtain after a fragile performance. On the walk back to the bus stop, his phone died mid-thought, leaving him alone with the ceremony of his own footsteps. The sky considered rain and decided to practice instead. He retraced his route in reverse: curve, Willow, Bells, bus. The 22 came half full of people with their own scratched stories. He found a seat near the back and collapsed into the realization that he had given away a morning he could not remake. The ache wasn't regret, it was that particular soreness that kindness leaves when it uses muscles you didn't know you had. He got off 3 stops early so he could walk the last bit and figure out what to tell Miss Serrano if she ever asked again. On a bakery window, he caught his reflection, young man in a tie that had stopped trying, pants with a water stain that looked like a map of a country he'd never visit. He thought of all the ways people succeeded that had nothing to do with scoreboards, the quiet wins with no trophies, the doors that felt closed until you noticed the window you could pry. At home, the apartment was warm with onions and the comfort that somebody else was there to greet you. Ma stood with a dish towel over her shoulder, Bree at the table coloring a dragon into a princess because art was disobedient like that. "Well?" Ma asked, reading his face before his words. "I didn't make it," he said, and the words emerged without apology or elaborate defense. He told them what he'd chosen. He told them about Agnes and her hydrangeas and the bells that were too proud. He told them about the look on Lydia's face and the way the blue door closed like a secret. Bree frowned at the injustice of a world that didn't rearrange itself around her brother's heart. "So do they just not take you?" "Maybe they reschedule," Ma said, hope spoken like a test. "Maybe they don't. Either way, you didn't lose anything you were meant to keep." Her faith pressed against his doubt but didn't erase it. He went to his room, loosened the tie until it became a question mark, and opened his cracked laptop to compose another email, this time longer, this time careful. He wrote honestly about his morning without selling it as a story. He said he understood if the program needed punctuality more than it needed him. He attached his materials again in case the first message had landed in a folder labeled inconvenient. He hit send and let the awful quiet after a risk fill the room. Sometimes you had to sit in the quiet until it told you something you didn't want to hear. Afternoon bent itself into evening, and the city switched on the lights it could afford. Kean tried to study, but the words in his textbook behaved like birds that didn't want to be named. He helped Bree with her math, which was really a puzzle about how to believe you could do a thing for the first time. He washed the dishes while Ma sat, feet in a tub of warm water like a truce with gravity. "What if they think I made it up?" he asked the sink, because it wouldn't pretend to be objective. "What if they think you told the truth?" Ma replied from the table. "We're not responsible for which ears hear us." At 8:15, Bree went to bed without complaint because her paper dragon had finally decided it wanted to be a dragon again. At 8:30, Ma stretched and said, "I'm going to call Miss Serrano." Kean turned, shocked. "You can't." "I can," she said gently. "I won't." "But I could." She smiled sideways. "I want you to imagine people are rooting for you in rooms you haven't seen." He tried to. It felt like balancing a book on his head and walking. He made tea for Ma like he could steep patience out of leaves. By 9 o'clock the neighborhood quieted the way sidewalks do when stories like to travel. A basketball double thumped somewhere, a bus sighed at the end of its route, a couple argued softly because anger has neighbors. Kean stood by the living room window and looked at the 4 streetlights on Maple. 3 worked. 1 flickered the way it had flickered since winter, the city's shrug in bold form. He told himself to stop rehearsing how he would respond if the internship never called. He told himself stories of other doors. He told himself he would still be himself in the morning, which was not nothing. At 9:14 p.m., Maple Street shifted. It was a subtle change, like the sound a page makes when someone turns it in a quiet room. He saw it before he heard it, a long shape gliding, headlights kissing potholes into obedience. Then the vehicle slid under the broken streetlight and gold spilled across black paint like a secret. A limousine. Keane blinked once, twice, as if closing and opening his eyes would swap screens in a life he recognized. The car was one of those creatures that knew it was impressive without trying. It pulled against the curb with the confidence of somebody who had never asked for permission to park. "Ma," he said, not loud, because the word found its own volume. She stood beside him in 3 steps that sounded like a question. The car idled, purring like expensive certainty. The driver's door opened, and a man in a dark suit unfolded from the vehicle with care, like he'd learned to measure his movements so the world noticed them. He checked a small card, white, stark, and then looked up at their window as if names sometimes lived behind glass. Their building had seen pizza deliveries and flower vans and once, memorably, a police car that had learned it didn't fit into the parking space. It had never seen this. Bree's door opened, her hair a fuzzy halo of bedtime negotiations. "Why is a movie outside?" she whispered. There was a knock on the door, firm but polite. Keane's chest found a new rhythm, an unpracticed drum. Ma's eyebrows climbed exactly once and then lowered in resolve. She nodded toward the door. "Go on," she said. Keane crossed the small room that had grown enormous in the space of a few heartbeats. He put his hand on the knob and felt the cool metal remind him he was here, that everything had led to exactly this second no matter how impossible it looked from the sidewalk. He opened the door. The hallway outside contained the smell of old paint and the shape of an answer. The driver stood there, cap in hand, posture saying he worked for someone the air made space for. Up close, he was younger than the car made him seem, with a calm smile like he'd practiced sincerity enough to mean it. He glanced at the number beside the doorframe and then at Keane as if confirming that houses sometimes wore the right faces. "Mr. Rivers?" the driver asked, his voice as smooth as the car's paint. Keane swallowed, his name suddenly a question he wasn't sure how to answer. "Yeah?" The driver extended the small white card. On it, embossed letters rose like careful hills. The name was a last name he didn't know could carry so much weight. "My employer would like to speak with you," the driver said. "If you're willing." From the street, the limousine's rear window slid down a half-inch with the sound of money making a decision. A sliver of interior light cut the night, and a silhouette leaned forward, invisible except for the certainty that whoever sat inside didn't have to lean for anyone. Keane's heart walked to the edge of something he couldn't name, looked down, and realized how high he was. "Who is it?" Ma whispered, her hand light on his shoulder like a vote of confidence. The driver's smile didn't change. "Someone whose mother can't stop talking about the boy who wore kindness like a good coat." The rear door clicked, a small sound that traveled farther than logic, and the car's interior opened like a stage waiting for its first line. Keane took one breath, then another, steadying himself on the only thing that had been certain all day, the choice he'd made when his plans and his principles had collided at a bus stop. He stepped forward. And a voice from inside the car, the kind of voice that made rooms adjust their posture, spoke his name. Spoke his name. "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story." "Keane," the voice said again, not asking but confirming, as if it had known him already from the shape of his day. It belonged to a woman whose vowels wore a soft Atlantic shore and whose consonants cut neat lines through the night. The rear door of the limousine swung wider, an invitation written in leather and hush. He glanced back at Ma. Her face was a steadying lighthouse. Bree peered around her hip with the solemn gravity of a kid whose bedtime had been interrupted by a plot twist. Keane stepped out into the hallway light and into the smell of clean wool and something citrus that reminded him of successful people's kitchens. Inside, the car felt like a room that had decided it would not be rushed by anything as ordinary as time. The woman sat angled toward him, a tablet resting on her knee, gray hair arranged with the effortlessness that comes only from enormous effort. The eyes were Agnes's long-lashed eyes, reissued in a face that had learned to live in boardrooms without becoming one. Miss Calloway, he guessed, because the card the driver handed him, thick as a promise, bore the name Call Zero Way Foundation in silver that caught the streetlight and made it keep catching. Evelyn Calloway Harper, she said, offering a hand that had shaken more hands than Cian had opened doors. Agnes is my mother. Lydia is my sister. She called me this afternoon and then again at dinner and then again during dessert to tell me that my mother had an adventure and the adventure wore a necktie and good manners. She smiled, something like gratitude and mischief mixing behind her teeth. I like meeting people who show up as themselves on the worst possible day for it. Cian sat on the edge of the seat as if the car might grate his posture. I'm sorry for the late hour. Don't be, she said. We make time for what matters. My mother can't stop talking about the boy who knew Henderson Lane better than she did. She told me you wore kindness like a good coat. Her gaze searched his face without prying. Is that true? He almost shrugged, then remembered Ma's advice about letting his face finish sentences. I try to be the person I want to meet on a bad day, he said. The answer was honest and hung there in the car's conditioned air, curious about its own courage. Evelyn nodded as if she'd asked the question mostly to hear the answer said aloud. Do you know what I do, Cian? Something with philanthropy? He didn't want to guess wrong in a car that could probably afford accuracy. Something with responsibility, she said. Money is just a tool. Responsibility is what makes it sharp or dull. The Calloway Foundation funds memory care programs, transit safety, youth apprenticeships, places where people get lost and other people can help them find the path again. Her eyes warmed. Tonight, I wanted to put a name to a thank you. And I wanted to ask you a question. He waited. Who taught you to choose the harder right over the easier wrong when no one is watching? He blinked. The question didn't relace. My mother, he said. And a few teachers who noticed things. And maybe my sister, without meaning to. Good answers, Evelyn said. Lydia sent me your email to the internship coordinator. Miss Serrano, yes? You wrote without asking for credit. You wrote with the assumption that the opportunity might go on without you. I didn't want to leverage someone else's confusion, he said. The words tasted like humility and ash. Evelyn tapped her tablet. I called Miss Serrano. She glanced up to watch the way that sentence rearranged his breathing. We sit on the same advisory board for a city workforce program. She read your message and, in her words, saw all the right flags. All the right flags? Not red. The opposite. She has a soft spot for kids who can hold two truths at once. She asked me to tell you she'd like to reschedule your interview for tomorrow at 3. She also told me to tell you, quote, tell him not to wear the same shoes if they hurt. Cian's laugh escaped before he could catch it. The relief that followed didn't erase the day, it simply made it make a different kind of sense. Thank you, he said, surprised by the precision of the gratitude lodged in his chest. I'm not done being forward, Evelyn said lightly. I'd like to offer you paid work while you wait for what's next. She swiped to a document and turned the tablet. The header read, Small Dares Pilot, Intergenerational Escort and Wayfinding Program. We're piloting a neighborhood initiative pairing trained youth with elders who need a companion to appointments, church, simple errands. It's not a caregiver role, it's a navigation role, a wayfinding kind of kindness. 2 afternoons a week. Stipend. We handle vetting, training, liability, all the scary words. She studied his face. I think you'd be very, very good at it. He stared at the words small dares and felt something in him stand up. The pitch wasn't charity. It was architecture. He could see how hours in a week might fit around school and the internship and still leave space for Bree's homework and Ma's ankles. I don't know how to be a program, he said, because sometimes the truth needs to be clumsy first. You know how to be a person, Evelyn said. We can translate. She leaned back, the leather sighing conspiratorially. There are cameras everywhere, Kian. If you haven't noticed, I work in a world where people like to discover good deeds and turn them into short-term content. I didn't come here to offer you that. I came to offer you a job because I want my mother's adventure to be the pilot case study we build around. With your permission. He weighed the word permission as if it had heft, because for once, it did. If it stays about the elders and not the performance of kindness, he said carefully, then, yes. I'd like that. Evelyn's smile nudged the world 2 degrees closer to tolerable. You'll find working with me involves frequent and explicit consent. We do not make heroics of ordinary decency. We make decency contagious. She wrapped the glass, the driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Marcus, could you take us by Henderson? We'll be brief. Kian blinked. It's late. Late is when things get decided, Evelyn said. Besides, I want you to see my mother in her natural habitat when she isn't accidentally riding to the wrong bus stop. The car slid back into the night, Maple Street watches lifting their chins to follow. Inside, Kian found his hands had steadied. He texted Ma with a summary that used too many exclamation points for someone trying to be an adult. She replied with a string of emojis that made no sense in perfect sense. Henderson Lane, after hours, glowed with the quiet of houses that had set their alarms and forgiven themselves for what they didn't finish today. The blue door opened before Marcus fully braked. Lydia stood there in a cardigan wrapped around her like regret. Behind her, Agnes perched on the edge of a floral chair as if the chair had told her it might fly at any moment. Evening, Mom, Evelyn called, stepping out with the casual authority of a daughter who still knew which cabinet held the good mugs. I brought a visitor. Agnes's face lit. Kian, she said with perfect clarity, and patted the cushion beside her. We achieved Henderson, didn't we? I told the garden not to be smug. We did, he said, and the relief in Lydia's eyes might have been a whole season changing inside a person. He stepped in, reluctance and welcome ricocheting through his ribs. The house smelled like lemon oil and old paper, the perfume of rooms that remembered you even when you forgot them. Evelyn gave quick, competent instructions about locks and lights to a night aide who'd materialized like a polite apology. Then she turned to Kian. We'll do paperwork tomorrow if you're willing. For tonight, my mother has insisted on offering counsel, which in our family is code for feeding you something out of proportion to the hour. Toast is diplomatic, Agnes announced. It goes with every conversation. She stood, a little unsure of her knees. Kian offered an arm. You have good elbows, she said approvingly. That's where a gentleman lives when he's using his hands for work. In the kitchen, Lydia buttered toast with the speed of a person who had once applied for 100 jobs and learned how to make food happen between efforts. I should pay you, she said to Kian without looking up. Not for tonight. For the peace of mind that followed. I slept this afternoon, for the first time since, she didn't finish. The toast was golden and avoided becoming a metaphor only because it had more immediate responsibilities. You don't owe me anything, he said. The job she offered, he glanced at Evelyn. It's more than enough. Lydia's shoulders dropped a fraction. Take yes for an answer, honey, she murmured. They ate toast standing up because sitting down would have turned the kitchen into a therapy session, and at this hour therapy should probably wear pajamas. Agnes told him she'd been a teacher for 31 years, which explained the precision of her metaphors and the way she could still turn a room into a classroom simply by declaring an objective in a sentence. What's your 5-year? She asked, unexpectedly crisp. He started to say something about electrical engineering and community systems and the stubborn joy he took in making old things work a little longer for people who couldn't afford new, and then he realized he was smiling while he said it. Good, Agnes said. Ambition with service. That's a twin set. Evelyn's phone buzzed. She glanced down and made a face people make when they're choosing which fire to love first. Marcus will take you home, she said. Get sleep. Tomorrow at noon, training with our program director, Jasmine. We'll keep it light. At 3, Ms. Serrano. If you run, they'll make you run. If you walk, they'll make you walk. Either way you'll move. Questions? He had too many and none at all. Just one, he said. What do I call you? Evelyn at work, she said. Evie when I've fed you too much. Ms. Harper when we disagree and need to remember we're both professionals. Got it, he said, and let the cadence of the house, the soft ticking clock, the distant dishwasher, Agnes humming something that might have been a hymn, settle around him like proofs in a math problem satisfying themselves. Marcus drove him back down streets that now felt elastic, like they could hold more than one kind of outcome. The limousine's interior lights dimmed at a touch. Kean leaned his head back and let the day finally file itself. At his building, Marcus gave a little nod that contained both formality and, weirdly, affection. You wearing the same shoes tomorrow? Marcus asked. Apparently not, Kean said. They shared a brief, conspiratorial grin that made the sidewalk feel like a place that could keep a secret. Inside, Ma hugged him like gratitude embodied a mother and then separated. Bree danced once around the coffee table and declared herself his manager. He slept like a person who had earned it. Morning returned with the smell of coffee and rain giving the world a thoughtful rinse. Kean's inbox contained an email from Ms. Serrano confirming the rescheduled interview and attaching a very practical guide titled, Group Interviews Don't Have to Be Hunger Games. He liked her immediately for the title alone. Jasmine from the foundation training team met him at a community center that had learned how to be three things at once: gym, meeting hall, and daycare overflow. She was short, round-eyed, with a voice that invited you to try. The training was simple and human. You're not rescuers, she said. You're companions with good sense and protocols. We use a 2-call system: check in when you begin, check out when the elder is safely where they intend. You're not there to replace family or fix the world. You're there to make sure the world doesn't bump the person you're with. He learned how to say his own name so people could hold on to it, how to walk just a half step slower than his instincts, how to deflect the well-meaning but dangerous interference of strangers who like to help loudly. He signed the paperwork with a pen whose ink felt like decisions conserving themselves. Your first match is Thursday, Jasmine said. Mr. Rosales. Dialysis. 4 blocks, 1 bus, a wait, then back. You'll like him. He curses in Spanish only about baseball. I can work with that, Kean said. At 1:50, he left the center for the internship building, a squat glass rectangle that reflected a sky currently rehearsing 3 different moods. He wore different shoes. He carried the same folder, now fat with things that made him feel like someone who existed in other people's filing cabinets. The lobby smelled like cleaned carpet and ambition. 2 other candidates waited on a curved bench, a guy with hair that had been told to behave and a girl with a blazer that could cut a paper. Kean smiled at both of them as if small alliances could exist even here. Ms. Serrano emerged with a stack of clipboards and a grin that could project across the river. Welcome. You made it, she said to the room, then, quieter, to Kean, and you made it. He tried not to glow visibly. Group exercise first, she announced. Then short one-on-ones while you each pretend this isn't terrifying. She led them into a glass-walled conference room where a whiteboard waited like a dare. Prompt, she said, uncapping a marker, design a low-cost, high-impact improvement to public transit for seniors with memory challenges. You have 20 minutes and a $3 budget. Kean almost laughed. The universe had decided to rehearse its jokes in obvious daylight. The other 2 candidates introduced themselves: Daniel, who had coded a bus tracker app in high school, Priya, who had coordinated a campus rideshare for night classes. They both seemed like the kinds of people who woke up organized and considered that a moral position. Kean said, I'm Kean. I've ridden enough buses to have favorite drivers. He kept his tone light and then added, I spent yesterday helping a neighbor find her way home. I've been thinking about this problem, a lot. They leaned over the table. Daniel sketched interfaces with the casual authority of someone who believed the world should have one. Priya listed stakeholders calmly, her handwriting the kind that could run for office. Kean listened, then spoke when his thoughts wore clear clothes. What if we didn't start with phones, he said gently, And both of them paused, not offended, just curious. What if we start with location? Bus stops are fixed. Addresses are fixed. Memory isn't. We could use color bands at key bus stops, blue for Henderson-bound routes, green for the clinic, yellow for the market. We give elders color-coded cards that match where they're headed. Volunteers, like a small DARES crew, carry a color ring on their lanyard. If you see blue on someone's collar and you're wearing blue, you can just say, "Me too," and you know you're both going to the same place. He hesitated. It's analog. It's cheap. It's immediate. It's dignity safe. Priya's eyes lit. And we can add a symbolic layer for colorblind folks, shapes. Triangle, circle, square. She drew fast, triangles pointing like arrows. Daniel, to his credit, didn't try to appify at first. We could still have a website where families tag routes with colors and shapes and print cards. But the interaction is offline. You don't need a battery to be seen. Ms. Serrano had pretended to answer an email and was actually eavesdropping with professional joy. "Keep going," she said without looking up. By minute 18, they had a simple pilot plan, a dozen color and shape tagged bus stops, a printable set of cards, small business sponsors to pay for the paint and signs, and volunteers trained in a standard greeting, "I'm on your color." Priya drafted a $3 mock budget that felt both ridiculous and somehow true. Daniel proposed a one-page site. Kian described the lanyard ring like a conversation starter disguised as hardware. In the one-on-one that followed, Ms. Serrano listened to Kian for longer than was strictly allowed. "You think in infrastructure," she said. "I like that. Infrastructure is just kindness that learned to wear steel." She flipped a paper. "Your GPA is solid. Your teacher recommendations read like love letters to potential. Your schedule is creative." She lifted an eyebrow. "Jasmine tells me you're starting with the foundation tomorrow. That a conflict for us?" "No," he said. "It will make me better at this." He swallowed. "I have a little sister and a mother who do impossible things with not enough. I intend to learn to make enough a moving target." Ms. Serrano leaned back, considered which drawer held the right stamp for a decision, and then dispensed with stationery altogether. "You're in," she said, and the words hit him like a door that opened without squeaking. "Orientation Monday. We pay a stipend that won't make you rich but should make you more possible." She softened. "I'm glad you chose the thing you chose yesterday. That tells me who you'll be when the part of the job that no one sees matters." He left the building trying to walk like an ordinary person. On the sidewalk, he let himself grin at a stray dog who understood immediately and grinned back because dogs enjoy promotions they don't have to take. The next days learned how to hold more than one thing. In the mornings, he shadowed routes for the foundation, Mr. Rosales to dialysis, Ms. Freeman to the community clinic, a pair of best friends, Dottie and June, who insisted on riding to the botanical garden to sit on a bench and argue gently about whether the koi remembered faces. Kian learned where to stand to be useful without making the day about himself. In the afternoons, he started at the internship, absorbing an office culture that ran on post-it notes, Slack pings, and a coffee machine that sounded like a space launch. Daniel and Priya were in, too, and the three of them developed a rhythm that felt like the beginning of a friendship, gentle teasing, backup snacks, group chat full of memes that broke tension without breaking trust. On Thursday night, the security guard from the mini-mart found him near the bus stop and cleared his throat like someone rehearsing an apology in a foreign language. "Hey," he said. "The other day. I thought you were hassling that lady. I was wrong." He stared at his shoes. "My sister works in memory care. She told me I should try seeing first." Kian studied the man's face and found the unbragging courage it took to come back and say this out here in public where the night could tell on you. "Thanks," he said. "Seeing first is a good habit." They nodded like men in a movie who would not hug because the scene didn't require it, and it was enough. On Friday, Evelyn called. "Saturday, if you're free," she said. "Board brunch." She made the grimace of a person who had sat through too many agendas. I'd rather feed you pancakes than PowerPoints, but we'll do both. We want to pitch the color and shape pilot across 3 neighborhoods. Do I, present? He asked, heart bending toward fear and curiosity at the same time. You exist. That will be sufficient, she said dryly. Though if you want to sketch a lanyard, I wouldn't stop you. Saturday's boardroom was less mahogany than Keane expected and more sunlight, big windows overlooking a city that liked to pretend it invented the idea of itself. The board looked like a curated spectrum of power: retired judge, union leader, pediatrician, a poet who wore rings with stories. Lydia came, too, sitting slightly behind Evelyn like a sister and a COO. Evelyn opened the meeting with a sentence that didn't ask permission. We can turn kindness into infrastructure for the cost of paint and courage, she said. Then she let Priya run the numbers in a voice that made budget sound like rescue and let Daniel point to a 1-page mock website that did not apologize for being simple. Keane, she said, how will this feel at a bus stop? He stood at the front, hands open. Like a secret handshake without the secret, he said. A few smiles flickered. You're not telling someone what they need. You're showing them the shape of where they are. If you're wearing blue, I'm wearing blue, too. If you're holding a triangle, I know to tell the driver you're headed to Willow Clinic. It's about eyes, where they land. The elder doesn't have to remember the route, they just have to remember the color. People will help if you tell them how. The poet board member, whose rings were indeed stories, nodded slowly. Dignity is when the world meets you where you are and doesn't announce that you needed the meeting, she said. I approve. They approved the pilot with a unanimous vote that felt like applause even though no one clapped. It was unusual to feel that clean leaving a room where money had just been allocated. In the hallway, Evelyn slipped him an envelope with a grin. Your stipend for the foundation, advance for the month. We pay ahead, not behind, so you don't have to do math with your stomach. He blinked back the sudden sting in his eyes, an overflow valve functioning. I'll try not to cry in expensive hallways, he said. Do as you must, she replied, and patted his shoulder like a punctuation mark. The pilot painted itself onto the city as if it had been waiting politely for an invitation. Volunteers showed up to brush blue triangles and green circles onto bus stop poles with small, reverent strokes. A barbershop sponsored 2 stops with a hand-lettered sign that read, "Find your shape, we'll help you get there." On launch day, Keane shadowed the Henderson corridor. Agnes and Lydia came to the blue door to watch the world try on a new habit. The first test was unplanned. An older man stepped off the bus looking like he'd been dropped mid-sentence. He paused, scanned, saw the blue triangle sticker on the stop sign, then the blue triangle pinned to Keane's lanyard. His shoulders lowered. Triangle, he said. Triangle, Keane said, lifting his lanyard like a tiny flag. We're walking the same way. And they did. Word spread not through press releases but through the economy of relief. Church bulletins, bodega counters, coffee shop corkboards, each one telling the story of colors and shapes and volunteers with elbows worth trusting. The foundation's inbox filled with offers to paint, to sponsor, to train. Ms. Serrano, delighted, roped the internship team into a field study. Priya designed a photo log where the faces of elders were replaced by a small hand-drawn shape to protect privacy but not joy. Daniel added a text spot where families could type triangle and get the next 3 triangle-coded stops. There were glitches, of course: one vandalized sticker, a stop sign knocked askew by a truck, a tense conversation with a transit supervisor who didn't like interventions he hadn't invented. But in each case, the solution wore patience and a phone call from Evelyn to the right person who thought they were the wrong person until she convinced them otherwise. One evening, after escorting Miss Freeman home with a bag of produce she insisted on sharing, "You never ate a peach until you ate a peach at 8 p.m., she pronounced. Keane received a text from an unknown number. Can I call? Lydia. He stepped into an entryway where the light did its best and answered. Lydia's voice was thin with fatigue. Mom had a hard afternoon, she said. Not dangerous. Just mean. Sometimes the disease is mean. She kept asking for the boy with the good elbows. A pause, then softer, she meant you. Would you pass by tomorrow? Only if you can. Of course, he said. He would have said it if he had 1,000 less minutes to divide. The next day he brought Agnes a little keychain with a blue triangle, the kind you could worry with your thumb. For Henderson, he said. Her eyes went bright like a window catching morning. I'll keep this foolish street on a leash, she said, and tucked it into her purse like a passport. On the second Friday after the pilot launch, Kian's world fractured and reforged in the space of an hour. It began with a phone call from his physics teacher, Mr. Rahman, whose voice had the precise excitement of a person unafraid to root for a kid in public. I nominated you for the City Bridges Scholarship, he said. Apparently Evelyn saw it before I could tell you. She sent me a one-line reply, yes. Obviously. Kian sat on the curb outside the foundation office and tried to keep his breathing in the neat lines the moment required. The scholarship covered 2 years at City College with a stipend for books, transit, and a laptop that wouldn't embarrass him in a lab. He stared at his hands like they might reveal the pinch point where fate had grabbed him by the jacket and shaken. At the same moment, Ma called. Don't panic, she said, which is the sentence that builds the stage for panic. I twisted my ankle a little at work. Bree and I are at urgent care. We're okay. But my phone is dying. I'm on my way, he said, and hung up without letting fear write the next thought. He told Jasmine, who put down her tea in her pretense of not being a second mother. Go, she said, and grabbed her bag to follow 6 steps behind, because some people in this city had decided not to let each other do hard things alone. Urgent care smelled like disinfectant and the communal humility of being put in paper gowns. Ma sat on a vinyl chair, her foot elevated, chin high as if daring pain to try her. Bree held a popsicle like a trophy she had no intention of sharing. It's a sprain, Ma announced. I let gravity make a point on the back stairs. I told gravity to mind its business. Jasmine worked the room like a benevolent general, getting forms signed, finding an extra ice pack, charming an overworked nurse into a smile. Kian handled the insurance desk's questions with a steadiness that would become muscle memory. On the way home in a rideshare that smelled like pine ambition, his phone buzzed. Evelyn, our board wants to make an announcement tonight at the pilot celebration. Can you and your family be there? We have something with your name on it. He looked at Ma. She lifted an eyebrow, then two. We're going, she said. I'll sit and look dignified with my stupid ankle. Bree will clap loud enough for the wobbly lights. The celebration was at the community center, now transformed by paper banners that read "Find Your Shape" and faces that had learned a new way to say hello. The Triangle Stop volunteers wore lanyards like merit badges. The poet board member read a stanza about a city that sometimes remembered its manners. Mr. Rosales cursed baseball and hugged Kian anyway. Evelyn took the mic with less pomp than some people used to ask for the mic. We did a small thing that turned out not to be small, she said. You did it. Not the foundation. You. Neighborhoods are engines. We just poured in some oil. She beckoned. Kian? He walked up to the little stage in his not painful shoes. The room's applause felt like weather he wanted to live in. Evelyn handed him an envelope and, even before he touched it, he knew the weight of it would be a new set of levers. This is the inaugural Pathmaker Award, Evelyn said. It comes with a small scholarship and a commitment from us to follow your next good idea until it becomes infrastructure. It also comes with a request that you let this be about the work and not about you. She smiled sideways. And a request that you let it be a little about you for 1 minute so my mother can clap like she invented the concept. Agnes clapped. Oh, did she clap? She stood without asking her knee and clapped like the city was a 4th grader who had finally pronounced a difficult word. Kian took the envelope, thought about all the words gratitude would need to be adequate, and instead said the simplest sentence he knew how to mean. Thank you for seeing where the work already is. After, in the swarm of people who wanted to touch the moment so they could take a piece home, Ms. Serrano found him. You have a review next week, she said, mock stern. I'm going to ask you annoying questions about time management and you're going to answer them like someone who just got a scholarship and should be insufferable but somehow isn't. She softened. I'm proud, Kean. Jasmine elbowed him with affection. Your mother okay for rides? We'll set up a small Dares pair for her stairs on grocery days. She'll hate it and love it, Kean said. Which is how you know it's exactly right. He found Agnes on a bench, the noise of the room turning down around her like a radio that knew when to listen. She reached for his hand. Harry always said, she murmured, the world is a map you draw as you walk it. People think it's printed. It isn't. It's pencil. You write as you go. She squeezed his fingers. You're writing in ink now, dear. Kean swallowed. I had an interview, and I missed it, he whispered, attempting honesty as an anchor even in a room that wanted to lift him off the ground. I thought that would be the end of the story about me. Agnes looked at him with a teacher's accurate mercy. Oh, honey, she said. Stories don't end. They pause so you can turn the page. Some nights the city sleeps awkwardly and dreams the wrong dream. 2 weeks after the celebration, the triangle stop outside the clinic was scuffed with black spray paint, a sloppy X thrown over the shape, the kind of vandalism that wants to be an argument but hasn't learned grammar. Kean stood there in the early morning with a rag and a bottle of solvent, scrubbing slowly, annoyed but not surprised. He had learned that every good thing gathered its own weather system of resistance. An older woman approached and frowned at the mark. I like the triangle, she complained, as if someone had rearranged her living room without asking. Me too, Kean said. We're putting it back. You the one? She asked. The boy in the newsletter they send to my phone even though I didn't ask it to? Guilty. She considered him, then handed him a roll of blue painter's tape from a bag that looked like it might hold magical items if you negotiated respectfully. Hold this, she ordered, and began to tape off a crisp triangle outline with a competence that suggested she had painted kitchens and lives on worse deadlines. They repainted the shape together, and when the bus came, she boarded with paint on her hands that she wore like jewelry. Kean stepped back and admired the small, bright geometry reasserting itself against blankness. He texted a photo to the pilot group chat. Priya replied with 3 heart emojis and a link to a supply of vandal-proof stickers. Daniel sent a gif of someone wiping fog from a window to reveal a sky. Under the repainted sign, he felt something settle inside him, not a conclusion, but a commitment that didn't depend on applause. He thought of the first morning's sticky note, "Be kind," and how it had started as a reminder and become a plan. His phone buzzed. A new text, unknown number again. This time the message wore commas in a tone of polite formality. Mr. Rivers, this is Judge Elkins from the Pathmaker Committee. We've reviewed your application for the City Bridges Scholarship and would like to invite you and your mother to the awards ceremony next Thursday evening. Also, I ride the Willow bus. Thank you for the triangles. He laughed out loud on a sidewalk that had begun to feel like an old friend's front porch. Then he caught himself and stood a little straighter because some victories deserve posture. The awards ceremony was dressier than anything he had in his closet and warmer than most rooms that required invitations. Ma wore a navy dress that made her look like a decision someone should have made earlier. Bree wore a flowered sundress with sneakers because compromise is where joy hides. Kean wore the same tie he'd worn the morning he thought he'd lost his chance and a pair of shoes that did not conspire against his toes. Evelyn met them at the door with a hug for each. Lydia handled name tags with the gentleness of a person who understood the power of getting names right. Agnes arrived on the arm of the night aide, wearing a blue triangle pin like an inside joke the world could be in on if it wanted. When Kean's name was called, the applause felt different from the community center's applause, less noisy, maybe, but with a kind of depth that traveled. He walked to the stage with the careful ease of someone who knew he belonged without assuming he was the only one who did. Judge Elkins shook his hand with a pressure that successfully communicated both formality and sincerity. He didn't prepare a speech because the words that had gotten him here had been spoken on sidewalks and in buses and under stop signs. Still, when they handed him the mic, he didn't panic. He thought of the morning with Agnes and of all the ways the city had decided to become slightly kinder to itself and of his mother in navy, ankle-wrapped, still unbowed. I used to think opportunity was a door, he said. But sometimes it's a person at a bus stop. Sometimes it's a phone call you're scared to make. Sometimes it's a triangle you repaint because somebody needed to see it to keep moving. I'm grateful for the doors. But I'm especially grateful for the windows we can climb through without breaking anything. He smiled, because humor is an easier horse to ride when you're nervous. Thank you to my mother, who taught me to wear kindness like a good coat. And to the Callaways, who taught me to put pockets in it so other people could borrow some when they need it. After, as people shook his hand and told pieces of their own stories the way people do when a room gives them permission, the limousine driver, Marcus, materialized like a footnote come to congratulate the main text. Look at you, he said, pretending to polish Kian's non-existent cufflinks. You ready for the part where it gets harder and better at once? I think I've been in training, Kian said. Marcus grinned. Yeah. You passed. The next morning, Kian woke to rain that took its time getting serious. He brewed coffee and stared at the sticky notes still clinging stubbornly to the hallway mirror. Be kind. It wasn't cheesy anymore. It was an operating system. He thought of all the things the note did not say: be famous, be first, be seen, and how relief lived in the difference. His day held nothing explosive: a shift at the foundation, a check-in with Ms. Serrano about a project timeline, Bree's math homework about fractions that were really about justice. In the evening, he walked 3 blocks out of his way to look at the triangle he'd repainted, just to make sure geometry still kept its promises when no one was taking pictures. Under the sign, he found Agnes on a bench with a paper cup of tea, the night aide near enough to intervene and far enough to let the moment be itself. Agnes patted the space beside her. Consultation hour, she announced. What's troubling you that isn't trouble yet? He sat, and the words came without drama. I'm worried I won't be enough for all the things I've promised. Oh, that's real, she said. That's adulthood's favorite lie. You don't have to be enough alone. Enough is a team sport. She pointed her chin toward the triangle. You didn't paint that by yourself. He remembered the older woman with the painter's tape and smiled. No. I didn't. Agnes sipped her tea. Harry used to say, don't confuse being central with being singular. If you think you're the whole solution, you'll become unbearable to live with. If you think you're not part of the solution, you'll become unbearably sad. Find the middle. Build the middle. He nodded. The middle was a bus route at 2 p.m. The middle was an email answered at 9:30 p.m. with grace. The middle was a limo on Maple Street that had not come to rescue him but to involve him. A bus side to a stop. A woman with a blue triangle on her sweater stepped down, scanned, found the sign, then found Kian's lanyard. Triangle, she said. Triangle, he answered, and stood. He turned to Agnes. Office hours end? For now, she said. I'll send you my bill. He offered his elbow. She didn't need it this time. But she took it anyway, because being part of the solution sometimes looks like letting someone be useful. Weeks folded into a season. The pilot became policy on 3 lines. The internship turned into an offer for a paid summer placement in the city's Transit Innovation Office. Try not to faint, Ms. Serrano texted, as if fainting were ever on his to-do list. City Bridges paid its first stipend. Bree's math grades climbed like ivy that had finally found a brick with the right texture. Ma's ankle healed stubbornly, refusing to let one stare dictate her day. On a hot afternoon that made asphalt smell like it was thinking of becoming a different material, Kian stood with Evelyn at a new stop where a green circle gleamed like an idea that had learned its shape. She handed him a folder. City College registration packet, she said. You'll need to decide on classes by Tuesday. I recommend leaving room for wonder. He tucked the folder under his arm like a new story. Are you always this involved? He asked, genuinely curious. Only with the ones who terrify me by reminding me of my younger self, she said. I did something like this once and then got distracted by a career that wanted me to forget why I'd begun. You're my reminder. My selfish investment. She smiled. Don't let me down by letting yourself think small. I'll try to think medium, he said. Then we'll see. They stood in comfortable quiet, watching an elder and a teenager, strangers until the shape between them introduced them, walk toward the clinic together. Infrastructure, Evelyn had said once, is kindness that learned to wear steel. He thought now that it might also be kindness that invited others to wear it, too. That night, back on Maple, Kean stuck a second note beside the first on the mirror. Build the middle. Bree added a third without asking, eat the good cereal. He laughed until Ma came to see, then laughed again because her laughter doubled the usefulness of the sound. He had not become a different person, he had become more himself in public. He had not been discovered, he had been integrated. The city had not transformed, it had admitted something about itself it was too proud to say out loud, that it needed its people to be gentle with each other in organized ways. He lay down that night and felt his life settle into a shape he recognized, not a map with routes printed in immutable ink, but a pencil sketch that welcomed edits from people who cared. Tomorrow he would wake up, put on his good coat with the extra pockets, and go looking for triangles. He would probably repaint one. He would probably miss a bus and arrive exactly when he was most required. He would escort someone's grandmother to a door that knew her name and then walk back into a city that was learning to say please and thank you in paint. Outside, a car slid past, not a limousine this time, just a taxi carrying someone else's beginning. He smiled into the dark and let the day end without arguing. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.